As dusk settles over endless wilderness, the stillness of the night reveals secrets best left hidden. Tonight, camping trips become nightmares, where isolation and unfathomable terror intertwine. Enter, if you dare. Deep in a vast forest known only to a few locals, a group of friends set out for what was meant to be a rejuvenating camping trip. Samuel, Maria, Ethan, and Linda had long planned to escape the burdens of everyday life by immersing themselves in nature. They chose a secluded clearing far from the modern world, where the forest's ancient trees provided a natural barrier from civilization. What began as an innocent retreat soon transformed into a harrowing struggle against an unseen, malevolent force. On the first evening, the campers established a modest campsite. They arranged their tents in a rough circle and prepared a simple meal together. Laughter and easy conversation filled their hours as they recounted old memories and shared hopes for the future. Yet, even as they settled in under a star-filled sky, an inexplicable sensation lingered. Samuel, whose intuition had always been acute, found himself glancing into the darkened woods with a sense of quiet alarm. He could not shake the feeling that something was watching them, patiently biding its time. Over the course of the night, the group retreated into their individual tents for rest. Samuel, unable to sleep, sat on the ground near the dying embers of the campfire and began jotting down his uneasy thoughts. He recalled stories of strange disappearances in these very woods, a history passed down in hushed voices by the elders of a nearby village. As he scribbled in his notebook, he felt the weight of solitude pressing upon him, as if the forest itself were a living, sentient entity. His eyes moved from the pages to the dark tree line, where shapes might have been shifting just out of sight. In the early hours before dawn, a subtle disturbance roused Samuel. He noticed a series of footprints near the edge of the clearing, footprints that did not belong to any of the campers. They were uneven, as though made by a creature not quite human. Samuel's heart pounded as he collected the footprints in his memory, wondering if they were real or mere figments of his anxious imagination. He resolved to mention them in the morning. Yet, as the first light broke through the forest canopy, he found that the tracks had vanished, as if absorbed by the damp earth. The following day, the group set off on a short hike to explore their surroundings. The forest was dense and labyrinthine, its paths twisting unpredictably. Although the air was fresh, an undercurrent of tension shadowed their journey. Maria, normally the most cheerful of the group, became increasingly silent, her eyes scanning every rustle in the brush. Ethan joked about the eerie atmosphere to lighten the mood, but even his laughter could not entirely dispel the unease that had taken root among them. By mid-afternoon, as the campers reached a small clearing near an old, abandoned logging site, Linda spotted something that made her stop in her tracks. In the center of the clearing lay an old, weathered object that resembled a broken piece of furniture, an item completely out of place in the natural setting. Though it might have been dismissed as debris by others, Linda felt a chill at the sight. There was an aura of abandonment about the object, as if it carried with it the sorrow of forgotten days and a warning of impending danger. When she mentioned it to the group, her voice trembled slightly, and the others exchanged uneasy glances. Returning to their campsite that evening, the atmosphere among the friends had shifted palpably. Their earlier mirth was replaced by subdued conversation and furtive looks. As darkness fell once more, they gathered around the campfire for what they hoped would be a comforting ritual. Yet, each of them felt the oppressive weight of isolation intensify with every passing minute. The silence that followed their conversations was filled with an intangible tension, as if the forest had come alive with a quiet, insidious intelligence. Later that night, Samuel awoke with a start. He could not recall what had disturbed his sleep, only that a profound sense of dread had overcome him. The campsite was dark and silent, and as he moved quietly to check on his friends, he found that the uneasy feeling had deepened. In the dim light of his headlamp, he noticed that the ground around his tent bore faint, new markings that resembled the footprints he had seen earlier. They led away from the circle of tents and disappeared into the murk of the surrounding woods. Samuel's mind raced with questions as he retraced the trail by memory. Was someone or something circling their camp, drawn to their presence? He could not be sure. Every rational explanation seemed to crumble beneath the weight of his growing terror. In his heart, he knew that the forest was harboring a secret, one that had been disturbed by their intrusion. The night stretched on interminably, and though Samuel resolved to warn the others at first light, he was left alone with his thoughts and the creeping certainty that the wilderness held a malevolence beyond their understanding. By dawn, the group convened at the campsite with heavy expressions. Samuel described the footprints and the feeling of being observed, but his words were met with skepticism. Still, the object Linda had seen in the clearing and the pervasive silence of the previous night lent weight to his account. Together, they decided to leave the area immediately, believing that the ominous events were a sign to abandon their trip. However, as they began to pack their belongings, a lingering dread permeated the air, a sense that something had marked them in that dark, unyielding forest. As they trekked back along the trail, every step was laden with the silent promise of a presence that might be following them. Though they reached the edge of the woods by midday, none could shake the feeling that the forest was not ready to let them go. In the quiet moments of their journey, their eyes darted to every rustle in the underbrush and every shift in the wind. The memory of that first night in the clearing haunted each of them, a testament to the unwelcome presence that had silently observed their every move. In the end, the campers left the forest with more questions than answers. The experience had changed them, imprinting a deep-seated wariness of the natural world, a knowledge that in the solitude of the wilderness, one might never be truly alone. The unsettling events of that trip would linger in their memories, a dark reminder that sometimes nature conceals secrets far more sinister than the human mind can fathom. In a remote mountain region, far from the hustle of modern life, Jonathan sought solace by venturing on a solo camping trip. Known for his introspective nature and a need to reconnect with the simplicity of existence, he chose a secluded clearing near an ancient grove, a place reputed in local lore to be the site of forgotten tragedies. Jonathan's intention was to find peace beneath the vast sky, but the isolation he embraced soon gave way to a relentless, gnawing paranoia. On the first day, Jonathan set up his modest camp with deliberate care, arranging his few belongings around a small circle that he intended to use for his nightly campfire. He recalled hearing tales of the area from old locals, a time when families had gathered around a great campfire to celebrate, only for a mysterious event to shatter their lives and scatter them to the winds. The memory of these stories was vague, yet the sense of loss and sorrow that they evoked resonated deeply with him. That evening, Jonathan kindled a small fire, its glow a welcome comfort in the encroaching darkness. As he sat quietly by the flames, he found himself lost in thought about the nature of memory and the passage of time. The flames danced, and with each flicker, his mind drifted to the tragic events of the past. His introspection was interrupted by an inexplicable feeling, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that made him acutely aware of the isolation around him. It was as if the very air had grown heavier, imbued with an ancient sorrow that seeped into his bones. After his solitary meal, Jonathan retired to his tent, yet sleep proved elusive. In the quiet hours before dawn, he awoke repeatedly, each time with the sensation of being watched. He would sit up, heart pounding, convinced that his solitude had invited an unseen presence into his camp. His thoughts turned to the stories of the Forgotten Campfire, and he wondered if the spirits of those lost souls might still linger in this sacred yet sorrowful place. As the night wore on, Jonathan's internal dialogue grew increasingly frantic. He began to recall every detail of the legends he had heard, the ghostly apparitions, the whispers of regrets, and the endless longing for redemption. His mind wandered, and with each passing minute, the boundary between his own thoughts and the lingering echoes of the past blurred. He questioned whether his own isolation was a mere state of being, or if it had unlocked something far darker within the depths of his consciousness. In the early light of dawn, Jonathan resolved to explore the area around his camp. He walked slowly along a narrow trail that wound its way through the ancient grove, his senses heightened by the chill of the morning air. Every step seemed to stir memories of a bygone era, as if the land itself was trying to share its untold story. In the quiet solitude of the grove, he came upon remnants of an old campsite, charred logs, broken pieces of pottery, and a ring of stones that once held a great fire. Jonathan's heart ached with the weight of unspoken sorrow. The scene spoke of love lost and moments that had slipped away into oblivion. As Jonathan lingered by the remnants of the forgotten campfire, a sense of melancholy overwhelmed him. The solitude that he had sought now became a canvas for memories that were not entirely his own. He could almost hear the echoes of laughter and mournful voices mingling with the wind, a spectral reminder of the past. With every detail etched into his mind, he felt that the area was a repository of grief, a silent testament to lives cut short by fate's cruel hand. Jonathan returned to his camp later that day with a heavy heart, determined to leave the sorrowful memories behind. Yet, as night fell once more, the unease returned with renewed vigor. The campfire, which had once been a symbol of warmth and comfort, now appeared as a silent sentinel to the tragedy that had unfolded in this very spot. In the dark hours, Jonathan found himself plagued by vivid recollections of the past, a relentless cycle of sorrow and despair that he could neither explain nor escape. His isolation had become a mirror reflecting the tragedies of those who had come before him, and with it came the relentless pressure of regret. In the final hours of his camping trip, Jonathan struggled to reconcile the peaceful solitude he had once craved with the unbearable weight of the Forgotten Campfire's legacy. He left the mountain with a newfound understanding that isolation, no matter how chosen, can open the door to the haunting memories of the past. The sorrow and regret of those who had suffered in this place lingered long after the fire had died, leaving an indelible mark on his soul, a warning that even in solitude, one may be visited by the ghosts of forgotten tragedies. On the outskirts of a dense, sprawling forest, a family decided to spend a weekend camping at a remote site known for its tranquility. David, his wife Karen, and their teenage daughter Mia sought a break from the relentless pace of modern life. They were drawn to the promise of peaceful days beneath wide skies and quiet nights away from the relentless hum of the city. However, as soon as they set foot on the secluded grounds, an inexplicable heaviness began to permeate the air, a silent warning that not everything in this wild expanse was as benign as it appeared. From the moment they arrived, the family felt isolated in a way that went beyond mere physical seclusion. David, who prided himself on his rational mind, could not shake the persistent feeling that the grounds held secrets, best left undisturbed. Karen noticed Mia's quiet apprehension as the daughter wandered near the edge of the campsite, pausing as if she could sense a presence lurking just beyond the tree line. Though their initial days were filled with cautious optimism and gentle exploration, a subtle unease began to grow with each passing hour. On the first night, the family gathered around a modest campfire. Their conversation was tentative, each member aware of the isolation that enveloped them. Without warning, an inexplicable chill settled over the group. There were no obvious causes for the sudden change. No storm clouds, no howling winds, only a pervasive sense that the forest was holding its breath. In the quiet that followed, each of them felt as if the earth beneath their feet and the darkness above were conspiring in silence. The moment passed, leaving behind a residue of doubt that lingered throughout the night. In the days that followed, Karen found herself drawn to a narrow, overgrown trail that led away from the main campsite. Despite David's insistence on sticking together, Karen felt an unspoken compulsion to explore on her own. As she walked the path, her thoughts turned inward, and she began to question the nature of isolation. Every step along the trail seemed to echo with memories of past visitors, and every rustle of leaves evoked an almost human whisper of regret. Karen's mind, already primed by the isolation of the place, slowly succumbed to a growing paranoia. She felt as though unseen eyes observed her every move, and in moments of quiet reflection, she wondered if the forest itself was alive with forgotten souls. Meanwhile, David busied himself with practical matters, gathering firewood, preparing meals, and ensuring the campsite remained secure. Yet even he could not dismiss the creeping sensation of being watched. His rationality wavered under the weight of the unknown, and he found himself glancing frequently into the dense forest, searching for signs of movement that never came. At night, as he lay in his tent, David's thoughts churned with worry. The silence of the forest was not comforting. It was oppressive, as if the very absence of sound were a prelude to something unspeakable. Mia, caught between the innocence of youth and the dawning realization of hidden dangers, became increasingly withdrawn. She spent long hours alone near the edge of the camp, her eyes fixed on the dark expanse of trees. In her solitude, she felt both the allure and the terror of the unknown. The isolation of the site, once a promise of adventure, had transformed into a labyrinth of silent corridors where every shadow held the potential for dread. Mia's quiet anxiety grew into a deep-seated fear that her family was not the only presence in these woods. As the weekend drew to a close, the family's shared unease reached a breaking point. An inexplicable incident occurred one late afternoon when Karen, returning from her solitary walk, found that the family's belongings had been rearranged in subtle, unsettling ways. Objects were moved from their usual places, and personal items appeared in locations that defied explanation. When she mentioned it to David, he recalled noticing similar discrepancies, but had attributed them to their own carelessness. Yet now, the evidence was undeniable. A silent intrusion that undermined their sense of control. The family convened in a quiet, tense discussion, each member silently acknowledging that the isolation of this place was no longer benign, but had become a source of mounting paranoia. They decided to leave immediately, packing their gear with a hurried, anxious efficiency. As they prepared to depart, the oppressive silence of the forest seemed to close in around them, as if it were reluctant to relinquish its hold. In their final moments at the campsite, the family felt a lingering sorrow, a realization that isolation in such a place could awaken the deepest fears hidden within the human mind. Their brief camping trip, intended as an escape from the world's noise, had instead become a journey into the quiet corridors of terror, a place where the silence itself became the most formidable enemy. As the last light fades over desolate campsites and endless forests, remember, not every journey into nature brings solace. Sometimes the isolation of the wild awakens terrors best left undiscovered. Sleep with caution, for in the darkness your mind may be your only enemy.